All right, welcome to Detecting the Marvels. We have my favorite guest back, my brother Nick. How have you been doing? How are things going?
Yeah, really good. I'm glad to be back. I can't wait to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and that's Miss Truesdale and the Fall of Hyperborea. That is a four-issue miniseries released in 2023, written by Mike Mignola, with artist Jesse Lonergan, who had previously done work with Image and Marvel in doing their Star Wars comics. Um, yeah, so what do you think of this comic? Like, just off before we dig into it, how did you enjoy it?
I have to say, it's probably one of my favorite Hellboy universe minis in a while. Um, it's I like when they set the stuff. Uh, I like when they go back into the Hyperborea stuff because I find it like
Mhm.
super interesting. And I'm a huge fan of Jesse Lonergan, so it's fantastic to see his work in like my favorite universe. So I loved it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I found really interesting. The look and the feel felt very Mike Mignola. Like he did a really good job of capturing the vibe of Hellboy comics while still kind of making it his own. Um, like is which I found really cool because it felt like sometimes like there's that Panya which looks interesting. I haven't read it yet, but I've seen clips or images from it. And it's a much different art style from the rest of the Hellboy universe kind of thing, whereas this didn't feel out of place, if that makes sense.
yeah. There are my only quibble with the Hellboy universe sometimes is I think stylistically some of the artists don't quite gel well. Without naming some names because I don't want to disrespect any of the artists, but they just well they're not bad artists. It's the tone either doesn't fit their art style or it's just the way that Mike Mignola tells a story doesn't quite
Hmm.
fit their art style. Whereas like there are some artists who adapt super well to it, and Jesse Lonergan is one of those artists who just gets it. I think. And so yeah, like Pena was a pretty good one. There's been a few like Duncan Fegredo is one of those artists who I think is akin to Mignola the most, but still a
Hmm.
different enough art style. So when he took over, like with the Wild Hunt and uh, Darkness Calls, like it was almost a seamless transition. And I think Jesse Lonergan is one of those artists again, like who would be a seamless transition from Mignola, even though the art style is worlds apart. It's he gets what Mignola does and he adapts to it well. I think.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you were excited to talk about Hyperborea and the Hyperborean age. So I guess what we can do to educate some of our listeners who might not be familiar, it's more than just a setting. It's actually there's some history behind Hyperborea. So it actually goes back to ancient Greece, and it Hyperborean means to live beyond the north wind. So this is a region of perpetual sunshine, almost like an Eden. It actually means beyond the Boreas, where Boreas is the god of the north wind in ancient Greece. The land was considered divinely blessed with sunny and temperate. And was north of the Riphean Mountains, while others thought Hyperboreans may have actually been a Celtic tribe, and that it was considered by Hecataeus of Abdera in 4th century BC to be part of Britain. This was in a text fragment by Diodorus Siculus. So there's some history there, but then it gets weird. Because then we've got Blavatsky, who you brought up, Nick, the co-founder of the Theosophical Society in 1875, a kind of hermetic order that feels very in place with the Hellboy universe. Um, where they combined science, philosophy, mysticism, and had some, I think, might be nowadays problematic ideas about root races.
Ye-
Uh,
yeah.
although they were so weird, it's like, okay, I don't know what to like. There were four root races: the ethereal, which was when Earth was still in its magma form; the Hyperboreans, who were actually plant people. They reproduced by budding. Um, the
Mhm.
the third being the inhabitants of the lost continent of Lemuria, who were the first humanoids, and then the fourth being ancient Atlanteans. But she does sort of tie this back into her mythology. Um, so you also mentioned Hollow Earth. How does that tie in?
Oh, it's so Blavatsky's teachings. Unfortunately, well, I mean, she was problematic was a good way to put it. A lot of the teachings were co-opted by the Nazi movement back in the 30s and
Mm,
40s. Um, a lot of the Aryan mythology and stuff like that stems from that kind of realm of teaching back in the day. So there were also amongst those groups these ideas of the Hollow Earth and like the Nazis trying to find an entrance way into a much larger world within our world, kind of a thing. And like Hellboy, the Hellboy universe leans into a lot of those concepts. So like
mhm,
Hyperborea, the Hollow Earth, Vril is a big thing. Kind of like the divine energy of the cosmos. So a lot of that stems from Blavatsky's and uh, her group, which there's an analogous group in Hellboy, the Heliopic Brotherhood of Ra, which is almost a direct take
mhm.
from the oh god, what was it you just said? I'm blanking for some reason. The
The
Theopic.
the
Uh,
Theosophical Society or Theopic, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is almost a direct take from the Heliopic Brotherhood, or sorry, the Brotherhood is a almost
yeah,
direct take from that. And so that just it's a huge part of the mythos within Hellboy. Thankfully, Mignola sh- ignores a lot of the racial undertones or racist undertones from Blavatsky's writing, and kind of
mhm,
co-ops it in a similar way that like a lot of genre writers take Lovecraft's writings and
yeah,
kind of take it back a little bit from the creator itself.
yeah,
So it's well, I mean, hell, Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft were big subscribers to a lot of the Blavatsky teachings. Um, Hyperborea itself, featuring in Conan.
oh no, yeah, I was just saying, yeah, no, I agree. Like they were. I was just about to go there next. You beat me to it. They were very much inspired by Blavatsky.
Yeah, like the the i the ideas are interesting. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
the concepts. It's just I guess her her delivery was somewhat, grr, so to speak. But
yeah,
yeah, like I
yeah,
mean, like I said, like all of that, especially in Miss Truesdale, um, the Hyperborea is such a big. Well, I mean, it's the main setting, and it's essentially the
mhm,
impetus for all of the Hellboy universe. Um, like Hellboy's uh, right hand of doom plays such a significant factor in the Hyperborean story that it's just
Mhm.
it's really cool to see how like I said before, like Mignola was able to kind of co-opt the story and turn it into something I would think a lot more interesting than what Blavatsky herself did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, and like you said too, it's, the setting. One of the few good things about Lovecraft is he was very collaborative, even if he was a racist monster. Um, so you had him and like a bunch of his peers, like Robert Howard, sharing a sandbox. But that meant modern writers like Magnola and all of these sort of Lovecraftian storytellers today, all the way up to like Event Horizon, which is a Lovecraftian story.
Mhm.
Um, they've been able to use those really scary, spooky, mystical underpinnings and get away from the more horrific components. And I think Mignola does a good job of acknowledging those because I mean the villains are in many cases the kinds of people who were inspired by Blavatsky. So they're the bad guys, and it's sort of using that universe, acknowledging the flaws, but creating something that's not flawed in that way, um, which I think is really cool. It's a great way to sort of play with those universes and tell stories, uh, and have fun there. Um, yeah. So aside from the Greek and mythological and 18th or 19th century mystical underpinnings, we also have an interesting twist in this story, which I didn't see coming at first, is the isekai genre of Japanese comics coming into play, where Miss Truesdale, I mean, spoiler, but basically falls backwards in time, which I thought was a fun sort of play because it helps underpin the cyclical nature of these characters, and set up that story, which I thought was neat.
Yeah, well, that's something that's featured a few times in the Hellboy universe. There's the character in the BPRD um, who features in the sort of Hyperborea miniseries, um, and the character's name is lost to me for at the moment. I think Howard's, but he essentially does almost the reverse of Miss Truesdale in that his spirit comes from
Mhm.
a tribe of men who had lived after Hyperborea. Um, his spirit is pulled to the future, and he becomes key in saving humanity when Ragnarok finally happens. Again, spoilers for people who haven't read
Mhm.
BPRD and the finale of essentially the finale of the Hellboy universe. Um, but yeah, that's happened there, and
Yeah.
then there's also more of that kind of hinted at with Hellboy himself, with the character of Makoma in the Richard Corbin illustrated Hellboy Makoma miniseries, where actually Hellboy does it a few times, where his spirit transfers back in time and he's kind of inhabiting the memories of a different character, but mostly the Makoma one, where he's transported to ancient Africa and relives the tale of a an African hero and his journey. So there's questions about like, is this a reincarnation thing? Is this a spiritual kind of bond thing? Is this a bloodline thing? And Truesdale again, kind of. I don't want to say muddies the water a little bit in as much as like what the answer is, but it certainly builds on the question of what is the significance of these kind of cyclical uh, transfers of characters spirits, I guess. Because for Truesdale,
Yeah.
for Miss Truesdale to uh, make sure that the events that happen to make the future, she has to go back in time. So it's like this, yeah, it's like a paradox of spirituality. And the Howard's character, and
Yeah.
it's the same kind of thing. Like that character has to be transported to the future, um, to make sure that humanity survives in some capacity, and then his spirit returns back to the post Hyperborean age with all the memories of what he's done in the future, and he's like, I know I have a bigger purpose, and it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let me recap for the audience the broad strokes of the story. So Miss Truesdale opens in Victorian era. She's visiting the leader of the um, the the cult that she is a member of, and the leader, another woman who is the reincarnation of the founder of this brotherhood, um, but so thus very disrespected by her who should be her followers. She sort of feels Truesdale's pain, but then starts to recount a dream that she had of a great warrior woman fighting in the Hyperborean arenas. There's some really vivid depictions of violence, but in a way that does not feel gratuitous or it's gory, but it serves the story. Um, and much like Howard's original Conan, a character popularized by uh, a movie that reduced them to a grunting caricature, the warrior woman, Anam Yasa, as we find her named, is well spoken, wise, knowledgeable, far more measured than we'd expect a pit fighter. Um, and it turns out that the Miss Truesdale originally thought that she was this slave girl serving the warrior woman, and that the warrior woman was the leader of the cult. But it turns out it's the other way around. She is the true one destined for greatness, and it is this cult leader's previous incarnation that served her and became her friend and saved her. um, we see Miss Truesdale then return to London and pray to the god Anam Ra, and we fade to black. Uh, we then get one of those sort of infamous Hellboy sort of little tastes of a wider world with an aside by a couple of members of the Brotherhood who are recounting a little story of Hyperborea, and then in the footnotes we find out that they were killed run over leaving a pub and are now living in hell, documenting the detailed history of hell for the demons, um,
Yes.
which I
Oh man.
find fun. That's a fun little aside.
Yeah, if I recall, in the end of the Koesh, I can never pronounce it correctly, Kosheki in Hell miniseries, you see the two of them as like skeleton men riding away on an air balloon in Hell, and it's they're such fantastic characters. I would love to have a miniseries of them. But sorry.
Oh wow! No! That's the color that I love to have added. And hey, if anybody I'd say is skilled enough to contribute to that, I think you're the one.
Oh, I
So
would love
maybe
to have that.
pitch
Yeah,
it. um,
that would be a dream to
yeah.
work in the Mignola universe in some capacity.
Hey, you never know until you try. You never know until you try.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, from there we see a familiar glove for the first time in the cover art of book two. Miss Truesdale is lost in a trance, and now we see her recounting the rest of the events of that night, with the priest punishing her further, um, and trying to kill her after killing the slave woman. The Anamyasa chases the priest out of the temple, and she's confronted by reanimated corpses of prior warriors who she's fought. Um, and she finally chases down her last combatant and is bitten by a snake in front of a statue of Anamyasa, the first angel, and the one who forged the or shaped the demons and the dragons. Uh, and the statue begins to weep. At which point it goes on a rampage, um, killing most of the population of the temple. And we close the book out, book two, with Miss Truesdale silent on the floor. We then find out that she has passed away, um, and the the god Amet has resurrected the priest as a punishment, transforming them into a dragon, which then hunts down Anamyasa, who was found by the people and set loose on a river, which kind of the imagery actually kind of reminded me of the painting of Ophelia. I don't know if you remember that, Nick, but there's a painting of
Mhm.
Ophelia floating in the water. It very much reminded me of that. Um, but we find uh, Anamyasa is found by um, forest spirits and is sort of prepared, and we get an ethereal being called Eos who comes to take her to another realm where she can find peace. And we find that her name is
Oh, where you find out her name's actually a blessing, because she's named after the first angel. It means, yeah, blessed by Annam, I
yes,
believe.
yeah, Adam's favor. Adam's
Yeah,
favor.
yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah.
right. But and what we also find out is that her grandfather worked in the gardens of Thoth, the prior king, who was killed by this evil goddess Amet. Um, and he saw the statue which contains the right hand of Annam, which is the glove that Hellboy would later wear. So it's all sort of tying in. And we see this great battle with now Miss Truesdale's spirit inhabiting Anam Yasa. And Eos says something really, I think, that is important is like, that they're seeing the beginning, like that he tells these forest spirits to watch for they're seeing the start. And then we see um Anamyasa fighting the priest who's a dragon, Thor fighting Jormungandr, Hercules fighting the Hydra. And you mentioned, Nick, what was the name of that character?
Makoma.
Yeah, so Makoma, yeah, them fighting another dragon, and it's all, as it says, all one purpose. They all face a different battle with many faces, but they all share a purpose. Um, and what I take is as the implication, we see Hellboy there as the final person in this loop. So flash forward to 1953, Hellboy and Professor Broom are in a cemetery, and he finds Margaret Truesdale's headstone, um, with an inscription, Tefnet Trionis, the Queen of Heliopolis, the leader of the Brotherhood, who we found passed away in Manitoba in 1939. Um, but yeah, so like I think it's just some powerful imagery. It really is a cool it's a retcon that in no way harms anything. It just simply is world building, which I thought was really neat. Um, I think you mentioned, Nick, you felt it muddied the waters in a way, not necessarily a bad way. I thought it clarified it. I thought it, for me, it feels like they are the same soul. Like Eos was
Well,
saying, like this is the same entity reincarnating over and over and over again in a cycle, battling this dragon.
part of the thing that is more in the Kosheki miniseries and the Giant Robot Hellboy miniseries, those touch on the same Hellboy rebirth pattern, or like whether it's reincarnation or it's the same soul,
Mhm.
because Hellboy interacts with Kosheki uh, several times, and in the Giant Robot Hellboy miniseries, you see kind of the same pattern of heroes fighting the respective dragons, and Kosheki is in the same kind of lineage as Hellboy. So that makes me almost think that it's not a
Mhm.
rebirth pattern or not like a single soul, um, and like not like a reincarnation thing. Um, Also because there's the character. Oh shoot. I'm blanking. I am always blanking. There's another character who's in it that Hellboy exists within the same time frame. Um, Give me one second. I'm gonna look it up here. That kind of undermines
Okay.
that as well. So I think almost it's almost a lineage thing, more so than a soul thing. Um, so in the Giant Robot Hellboy miniseries, you see Makoma, you see um, obviously Thor. It's the same characters you see in the Miss Truesdale one, but you see several other characters. There's a cowboy who we never met. There's King Arthur, who we know that Hellboy is related to. He's the great 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 however many great grandson
Mhm.
of King Arthur. Um, but then there's also Howard's from BPRD. That was the one that I was trying to think of. So
Okay.
it could very well be a soul thing. Mignola hasn't clarified on it, and the thing about Mignola is he doesn't really spoil much. He's very cagey about his answers, so there's no real definitive thing. So there's a lot of speculation amongst kind of the Hellboy fans about what it is exactly. So um, I think I'm it. It could again, it could be the reincarnation thing. I'm thinking it's a bloodline thing, but who knows for sure until there's a miniseries that
Yeah.
completely answers it. But either way, like there's some
Yeah.
kind of
And I mean,
cycle of
yeah.
heroes. Um, so it's like,
Yeah.
and that's really interesting because that almost ties into like some kind of like a hero with a thousand faces kind of thing as well. Like where it's just like
Yeah.
there is an archetype, or there's a type of hero that exists within the realm of the Hellboy universe, where it's just like because all of them are carrying some kind of like weapon in their right hand where it's like it it could be like whether it's Hellboy's right hand of doom or Miss Truesdale's axe, or sorry, Adam Yasa's axe, or Makoma's hammer, or Thor's hammer, or Hercules. um it's just they're very very similar in spirit, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, I think the good thing about this is it, even if it's a lineage thing, if it's a shared spirit, or even if it's just simply a shared purpose, it. I mean, we get so used to these, like, I'm a Star Wars nerd. I'm the Palpatines and the Skywalkers and all of that nonsense. Sometimes that greater story is just people sharing a cause, which is
Mm.
the call to duty of doing the right thing. Um, which ultimately is the story of Hellboy. He has this destiny that he was forged for, and then he has the people he loves, and he sacrifices himself in a lot of ways to serve those he loves, and sort of go against that which is expected of him by those who would like him to sort of fall into that role. um so yeah, so I mean, and that's, I think, what a power of Mignola's storytelling is. He doesn't paint himself into a corner by saying, "Oh, it's this thing or it's that thing." It gives you grounds to interpret and to internalize it, however it works.
Yeah. And I think that the Mignolaverse is in a really interesting place right now because the story of Hellboy is done. Like the BPRD and Hellboy, Ragnarok came, uh, and Hellboy fulfilled his destiny, the destruction of man and then the rebirth of man. So now they're at a place where they can fill all the
Mhm.
gaps of what kind of came before and what led to that point. And Miss Truesdale being what it uh, is the impetus for all of it. Like you said, like the statue of Anum comes to life.
Mhm.
You see the serpent goddess infecting the people of Hyperborea, who eventually the serpent goddess becomes Hecate or Hecate. I can never pronounce that properly. Um, who becomes Ilsa Helpstein, who becomes the Iron Maiden, uh, and they are Hellboy and Hecate are intertwined in the apocalypse. They are the two kind of halves of the equation that bring about the end of man and the birth of man. So, uh, yeah, where that character, the 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 evolved spirit says this is the beginning. It's like it's very much like it's this is it. Like this ties into pretty much every aspect. It ties into the end. It ties into the angels that form the world, and Adam who draws Vril from the heavens and creates the Agdru Jihad and everything that kind of comes after it. So that's why like this miniseries could on the surface be seen as like a very kind of straightforward barbarian woman fighting a dragon, so to speak. But
Mhm.
there's parts of it that just kind of elevate it to something that's very significant to the mythos overall, and I think that's what elevates it as a story and as its place in the Mignolaverse.
Cool. Well, I think, with that great summation of how it fits in, this is a good place to wrap up. But Nick, is there anything you're reading right now that you'd recommend for folks to pick up or check out?
Oh goodness, I'm getting into a lot of books lately. Ultra Mega by James Herron. It's a great kaiju well, not even miniseries, it's an ongoing series. But he took a bit of a break after issue 4 because he does majority of the the writing, the art, and all that kind of stuff. So issue 5 is supposed to be coming out in September, and I'm super psyched for that. Um, Our Bones Dust is an actually both of these artists, James Herron and Ben Stenbeck, were both collaborators with Mignola. Ben Stenbeck's uh, Our Bones Dust was a mini series. The trade came out a little while ago. That one's amazing. I can't recommend those two enough. And like always things like Saga. Saga's always great. Yeah,
Mhm.
not that I'm poo pooing the mainstream Marvel stuff or trying to be all hipster or anything like that, but I think most of the interesting stories right now are coming out of the smaller press. Uh, Jesse Lonergan has an ongoing series or a mini series right now called Man's Beast, and their art is always fantastic. It's like it's a brushwork art, but it has this like super kind of kinetic energy. He has this dynamic panel layouts where it's like there's usually supposed to be like a max of however many panels. I think like the traditional 9 panel is the most you should have on a page. Jesse Lonergan, they do like 12, 15, just a bunch of little tiny panels with a bunch of action. And so if you liked Miss Truesdale and the Fall of Hyperborea, check out Man's Beast, because it's a different type of story, but it is still, sorry, Man's Best, excuse me. It's still very much their artwork, and it is fantastic.
Awesome. Well, yeah, like I've been sort of like, I grew up being a big X-Men fan, and I was so turned off of, like, after that Krakoan age thing sort of snowballed into the beast that it was at the end. I've been finding much more interesting stories elsewhere as well. So yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for the suggestions, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully, I can come back and talk about this. There's a sequel coming up to Giant Robot Hellboy, coming out early 2025. So I would love to talk about that when it comes out, because if you haven't checked out Giant Robot Hellboy, it's Hellboy with kaiju action and 1960s British espionage. It's a crazy one.
I mean, you just said three of my favorite things, so we're gonna have to have you back to talk about that and its follow-ups. Thanks, Nick.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Matt.
You've been listening to Detecting the Marvelous, a Far From Here and ShowbizMonkeys.com co-production. Your producers are Dan Rosen, Matt Erdill, and Shahara Ghaznabi. Music by Glenn Bouchamp, and art by Ben Steamroller. Thanks for listening, and remember, true believers, Excelsior!